Shut the fuck up, fuckface. Patriarchy, fuckface. Why the fuck did you accept the position? Who the fuck hired you?
Oh, we should go. Alright, so I originally made a very long refutation of Superwoman's claim that we, the West, and I actually specifically singled out America specifically, only America, versus 2 billion Muslims. In her exact language, would not stand a goddamn chance. Which I have to presume that she means a full-scale open war. Now, of course, there are 1.6 billion Muslims actually in the world, so this calculation is beyond conservative. I tried to make it as fair as possible, and of course, this is a calculation based on reasoning, so the values I use, I reason them out, so that's why it takes very long rather than just a straight-up calculation. And specifically what I mean by that is the calculation for what the American kill-death ratio would be, because we know for sure it's going to be way higher than 1, because this is modern America and the modern American army. The last time the Americans fought a single battle where they lost more troops than they killed was probably World War II, maybe Korean War. I'm talking about a full-scale battle. I'm not talking any type of, ambush or little firefight with, a platoon versus a couple Taliban. Like, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. We're not talking about that. That's not even going to be close to comparable for the scenario we're talking about here. And of course, I'm just treating this as a straight-up numbers, fight to the death, basically. No objectives, no who's invading who, nobody's invading anybody, there's no amphibious landings, any of that type of shit, no defensive positions. Nobody has the high ground, nothing like that, because that's just a giant, worthless can of worms. That's for a scenario that's more specific, rather than this very generalized, you wouldn't stand a goddamn chance scenario. And, of course, I'm not an expert at everything. I have no formal officer training or military strategy training. I've never been in the armed forces. I've never been to, some sort of university of military strategy, anything like that specifically that is formal or concrete. I just play a lot of strategy games like Total War and shit, and I also like a lot of, military history and just military knowledge. I have that rolling in the brain. I think I have a good grasp of what I'm talking about. I think my estimations and how I reasoned them were sensible, logical, they made sense. Of course, I'm open to the debate, to, new evidence or new reasoning that could overturn such, things that I said. Of course, I was playing it very conservative with my estimates, which should give a good amount of leeway just in case you're questionable, doubts, whatever. And I really do stand behind this calculation. I think this is a good calculation. Prove me wrong. Anyways, that should be good enough intro, explanation, and disclaimer for this video, so I'll play the clip that I'm specifically responding to, and the response will just play from there.
And although there are approximately 175 million Muslims in India, there are approximately 2 billion in the whole world, which means if every Muslim was a terrorist, you wouldn't stand a goddamn chance.
I don't agree with your premise that we, the West, or let's just say America alone, stand a goddamn chance. Because wars aren't fought and won on numbers alone. Alright, so let's take a case study battle of the Battle of Mogadishu, which was the Black Hawk Down story, which featured some fairly well-trained U.S. units and operatives versus a bunch of untrained militia, because let's face it, that's what the Islamic army will most likely be, untrained militia. And I'm hashtag all on the 1.6 billion, which is more accurate than your number, but, we'll use your number just in this calculation for your sake, right? Now, in almost every country in the world, it's about 63% of the population is aged 15 to 64, which is your working demographic. About half that is going to be your male population, which is going to be your conscripts. And so the calculation for that is your 2 billion overestimated amount of Muslims divided by 31.5%, which gives you 63 million conscripts for your Islamic shit army. Now, taking into the factors of the Battle of Mogadishu, you had, obviously, a little bit more elite units on the American side, U.S. Marines, stuff like that, Army Rangers, but you also had a situation contextually where the battle went pretty bad for the Americans, and the plan kind of went to shit. It became a rescue operation. A lot of guys got killed, more than expected, that's for sure. And it was in urban street fighting and with minimal fire support from helicopters and gunships. It was a lot of, essentially more of a general gunfight that ended up with a lot of ambushes and stuff like that, which is probably going to be the reality of the Islamic army versus the American army, just because they'll have the numbers to maneuver and surround the Americans and stuff like that, at least in an urban environment, which is much different than a lot of the engagements in Afghanistan and Iraq, which had a lot of fire support from armored divisions and helicopters, gunships, a lot of open terrain and small villages. You had a lot of opportunities for you to just call in an airstrike and level the fucking area for the most part. And so because of that, over the course of a decade of the Afghanistan and Iraq mission, about a decade, you had, according to the Department of Defense, 4,424 kills from over the course of Operation Iraqi Freedom, which is, initial invasion all the way up to 2010. So that might seem a lot. The difference is that you have hostile fire deaths, 3,777, which is over 500 less and reduces all of the bullshit, all of the IEDs and all of that crap. Now, that still seems like a lot, right? So the problem is once you get into how many insurgents are estimated to be killed, probably around 27,000 insurgents are estimated to be killed from, get this, June 2003 to 2011, which, as you may know, does include the initial invasion of Baghdad, because the insurgency didn't exist. They weren't fighting the insurgency when they invaded Baghdad. They were fighting the Iraqi government. And so it's estimated that between 7,600 to 10,800 Iraqi government forces were actually killed during the invasion of Baghdad and the initial invasions of Iraq, which is an important distinguishment because you're including U.S. military deaths in the invasion of Iraq, which is a completely separate enemy, and it's just hard to compare. Combine that with the fact that you also had other boots on the ground from other countries, such as the UK and Canada, that would have been responsible for either fire support or kinetic operations. There's so many factors in for Iraq, it's just a mess, and Afghanistan isn't much better. And regardless, whatever estimate I make is going to be a very rough estimate, because I'm taking largely conscripts versus trained soldiers, which is most likely how it's going to go down. Let's face it, even the conscripted Americans are likely to be much better trained than the Islamic army conscripts. And that's just the fact of the matter. So the calculation for the Battle of Mogadishu for the kill-death ratio is an estimated 500 dead Somalian militia versus 19 confirmed dead Americans, which is a ratio of, works out to be 26.3 per American, right? Now, obviously, we are talking about much better trained Americans, but we're also talking about an ambush situation with no plan and, what bad Murphy's Law type scenario, right? Now, to make a conservative estimate on what I think this hypothetical American army would have for a kill-death ratio, I think it's best to separate it for the active military and conscripted military. I'm going to give the conscripted American military a kill-death ratio of 5. I think that's very conservative and reasonable, considering that Iraq has a kill-death ratio of 10, and they're probably going to be just as well trained, as well as not be a guerrilla war, which is going to incorporate, the American superior technology and equipment and weapons, such as armor and stuff like that. rather than ambushes and IEDs and shit. And for the 1.4 active U.S. Army, which is obviously not going to be all combat roles, but should still at least be combat trained somewhat. And, you would have, in this total war scenario that the U.S. Army would be engaged in, you would have these roles be reassigned to combat roles if need be. If, for example, drones just weren't as effective, or they weren't needed, or there wasn't enough operational, or what have you. So I was originally thinking 15 would be a good KDR for the entire active U.S. military, but that's not very conservative, I guess. I was thinking 10, but 10 just seems too low. I think 12 is a good number, nice in between. So a KDR of 12 for the entire American military, active American military. And like I said before, this is primarily based on the information from the Battle of Mogadishu, as well as, I guess, Iraq, but I mean, it's just difficult to compare it. It was still about a KDR of 10, and that was ambush situations, and I think it's going to be much different when you have an open warfare battle with the Americans. So, running the numbers on the active American military, we have a result of 17 million dead Islamic Army fighters. Of course, it's just a matched result, so it's the advantage result. Now, subtracting that already active 1.4 million personnel, the 101,600,000 American conscription-aged males, you end up for the American conscript army, 100 million males, just to slightly round down and keep it a nice even number. Now, with the kill-death ratio of 5 that I mentioned, which was very conservative, mind you, that's going to end up with 500 million. So compare that to our original, advantage to match, at least, because the claim is you wouldn't stand a goddamn chance. You have 630 Islamic conscripts to match. And again, that's assuming that they're mostly or all militia fighters. And so when you compare the factors, you're comparing, again, 630 million for the Islamic Army side versus 517 for the now grand total for the American side. Now, you might be thinking, oh, haha, the Islamic Army beat them by 100 million. That bam, son. See, the problem with that is we're going to have to now make this into a combat odds ratio, like, a percentage, because straight up numbers is just fucking useless. And when we do that calculation, we end up with a 60.9% chance of the Islamic Army winning, versus a 39.9% chance of the American Army winning. Now, of course, mind you, that is a very conservative 5-point KDR, and you might be thinking, that's ridiculous, because they're still conscripts, man. They're still conscripts. Doesn't matter. They won't have any training. And the problem is that's factually wrong. They probably will have training in this fight, and that's why I'm factoring that 5K KDR, not to mention the fact that we have seen how effective American troops that are definitely more trained than conscripts are on the battlefield, and we have seen that America can, and in fact does, support training in a total war state. The last time done, obviously, was 70 years ago in World War II, where they were versing an actual modern army as well, which is another ballpark factor that you have to factor analysis, and God, this stuff gets really messy. So when I say, yes, 5 KDR very conservatively, I mean it. And by simply increasing the point by 1 on the American Army's KDR, which is increasing it from 5 to 6, now gives the American Army in total 617 million versus 630 million, which now brings the percentage of the Islamic win now down to a 51% chance and a 49% chance of an American Army win. And that's simply by increasing the KDR by 1. So, I mean, any more you're adding to the American Army, which I do think this is, yes, a conservative estimate, which might be a more realistic estimate, you're now giving the American Army the advantage. Now, of course, the only way to criticize this really is by saying, you put in bad numbers. You inputted the wrong numbers. Those numbers are stupid. your analysis of the situation is wrong. And I would argue with that, but, let's face it, this is a hypothetical. I did my best. I would hope that, this isn't completely outlandish or completely stupid. I've based it on as good as facts as I can. I mean, yeah, what else is there to really say? I believe the math to be correct. Point me out if I've made a mistake somewhere. But I think I've refuted Superwoman's point. Yes, the American army does stand a damn chance. And holy shit, I just forgot. I used her 2 billion number of Muslims in the world, not the actual 1.6 billion Muslims. I think the Americans actually have the advantage in this case. Sorry, Superwoman, but you made a dumb fucking claim. I know, it was just a cheeky remark off the top of the tongue, but let's face it, when you talk about things you don't know what you're talking about, you tend to make yourself sound stupid. So don't make cheeky claims about things you don't know what you're talking about. And of course, you're gonna have that criticism of, oh, you made a 10-minute video of this? You're triggered, man, you're triggered. Honestly, I was just genuinely curious. I just wanted to know how the numbers worked out, just for my own curiosity when I saw this. So, hey, I had fun. I hope you did too. So, I suppose we're done here now then. See you later.